The blood-red sunset painted the horizon as Lillian Matthews clutched her Bible, the only possession she had left in this world. The stagecoach disappeared in a cloud of dust, leaving her alone at the desolate way station with nothing but the clothes on her back and a sacred book that had belonged to her mother. Montana Territory, 1878. This wasn't how she had imagined starting her new life. "Madam, you planning on standing there till the coyotes come calling?" The gruff voice startled Lillian from her thoughts. She turned to face a tall man leaning against the weathered post of the station's porch. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see the concern in his eyes. Dust covered his leather vest and denim trousers, telling the tale of long days on horseback. Lillian faltered, unsure how to explain her predicament without dissolving into tears. "The coach left without me." The stranger straightened, revealing his full height. "That's mighty peculiar. Stage doesn't usually leave passengers behind." "They didn't leave me behind," Lillian corrected, her voice barely above a whisper. My intended sent word that he no longer wishes to marry me." The humiliation burned hotter than the Montana sun. "The driver said I could either continue to Helena and find work, or wait here for the eastbound coach. I have no money for either." The man stepped closer, and Lillian instinctively clutched her Bible tighter to her chest. "Zachary Blackwood," he said simply, touching the brim of his hat. "Folks call me Zach." "Lillian Matthews," she replied, wondering if proper introductions mattered anymore in her current circumstances. "Miss Matthews, there's a settlement about 8 miles north of here. I was heading that way myself." He gestured to a magnificent chestnut horse tethered nearby. "I can take you there if you'd like. Might be easier to figure out your next move from there than from this forgotten patch of dirt." Lillian hesitated. Her mother had warned her about the dangers that could befall a woman alone in the West. But what choice did she have? "I have nothing to offer in return, Mr. Blackwood." His eyes fell to the Bible she clutched. "Looks like you've got something there." "It's just my Bible," she said softly. "It belonged to my mother." Zach nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes that's enough." He extended a weathered hand. "Come on. We should get moving if we want to reach town before dark." With a deep breath, Lillian took his hand and allowed him to help her onto his horse. She sat sideways in front of him, one arm wrapped protectively around her Bible, the other gripping the saddle horn. "Hold on tight," Zach instructed as he spurred the horse forward. As they rode across the open prairie, Lillian felt the warmth of the stranger at her back and wondered what providence had brought him to her aid when she needed it most. The settlement of Timber Creek emerged from the landscape like a mirage as dusk settled over the Montana Territory. A collection of wooden buildings straddled a rutted main street, with scattered homesteads dotting the surrounding hills. "It's not much," Zach said near her ear, "but it's home to about 300 souls." "It looks wonderful," Lillian replied honestly. After hours on horseback, any destination would have seemed appealing, but there was something charming about the frontier town with lamps beginning to glow in windows. Zach guided his horse to a modest 2-story building with a sign that read, "Harper's Boarding House." "Mrs. Harper's a good woman," he explained as he helped Lillian dismount. Her legs wobbled beneath her, unaccustomed to riding. Zach steadied her with a gentle hand at her elbow. "She might be able to put you up for a night or two while you sort things out." Lillian nodded gratefully, though anxiety gnawed at her. How would she pay for lodging? What would happen when tomorrow came, and the next day after that? A plump woman with silver-streaked hair answered Zach's knock. Her stern expression softened when she saw Lillian. "Zachary Blackwood, what trouble have you brought to my doorstep this time?" Despite her words, there was fondness in her tone. "Mrs. Harper, this is Miss Lillian Matthews. She's had some misfortune with her travel plans. I was hoping you might have a room available." Mrs. Harper's keen eyes assessed Lillian from head to toe. Poor thing looks half dead on her feet. Come in, come in. The boarding house was clean and modestly furnished. A delicious aroma wafted from what Lillian presumed was the kitchen. You've arrived just in time for supper, Mrs. Harper said. We can discuss arrangements after you've had something to eat. Zach shifted uncomfortably. I should be going? Nonsense, Mrs. Harper interrupted. You'll stay for supper too. I know for a fact you've been out on the range for days. You need a proper meal. Lillian noticed how Zach didn't put up much resistance to the invitation. Soon they were seated at a large table with 4 other boarders, a schoolteacher, a clerk from the general store, an elderly widow, and a young man who worked at the livery. The food was simple but hearty beef stew, cornbread, and apple pie for dessert. Lillian ate sparingly, conscious that she had no way to pay for this kindness. After the meal, Mrs. Harper showed Lillian to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor. Now, dear, the older woman said once they were alone, Zach told me a bit about your situation while you were washing up for dinner. Lillian's face flushed. I'm afraid I have no money to pay you, Mrs. Harper. We'll worry about that tomorrow. For tonight you rest. Her eyes fell on the Bible that Lillian still held. That looks well loved. It was my mother's, Lillian explained. She passed last winter. It's all I have left of her. Mrs. Harper patted her hand. Faith has carried many of us through hard times out here. Sleep well, Miss Matthews. Left alone, Lillian sat on the edge of the narrow bed and finally allowed the tears to come. Her journey west had taken every penny she'd saved from 3 years of working as a seamstress in Boston after her mother's death. Walter Cummings had seemed like a decent man through their correspondence, a successful merchant in Helena who wanted a respectable wife from back east. His letter, delivered to the stagecoach driver at the last stop before the way station, had been cruelly brief. He had found someone else and no longer required her services as a wife. Lillian opened her Bible, seeking comfort in its familiar pages. A folded piece of paper slipped out her mother's favorite prayer, written in her elegant script. The sight of her handwriting brought fresh tears. A gentle knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Miss Matthews? Zach's voice was low. I just wanted to check that you're settled in all right. Lillian wiped her eyes and opened the door a crack. Yes, thank you, Mr. Blackwood, and thank you for your kindness today. In the dim light of the hallway, his features seemed softer somehow. No need for thanks. I was wondering, what will you do now? Lillian glanced down at the Bible in her hands. I don't know. Pray for guidance, I suppose. Zach nodded. I've got some business to attend to in town tomorrow, but I'll be around if you need anything. That's very kind, but I've imposed enough. It's no imposition, he said firmly. Get some rest. Things often look clearer in the morning light. After he left, Lillian returned to her bed and opened her Bible again. As she read the familiar verses, she felt a fragile hope take root. She wasn't entirely alone. She had her faith, and perhaps, just perhaps, a new friend in this vast, unfamiliar territory. Morning came with the sounds of the town awakening, wagons rolling down the street, a rooster crowing, voices calling greetings. Lillian dressed in the same travel-worn clothes she'd worn the day before, wishing she had something fresher to put on. Downstairs, Mrs. Harper was already busy in the kitchen. Good morning, dear. Did you sleep well? Yes, thank you, Lillian lied. In truth, she'd spent much of the night worrying about her uncertain future. Sit down and have some breakfast. We need to put some meat on those bones. Lillian hesitated. Mrs. Harper, about payment. I've been thinking about that, the older woman said, placing a plate of eggs and bacon before her. I could use some help around here. The spring rush is coming, miners heading to the hills, cowboys moving herds north. I can offer you room and board in exchange for your help with cooking, cleaning, and laundry. Relief washed over Lillian. I'd be most grateful for the opportunity. It's settled then. You can start by helping me with the washing after breakfast. The day passed in a blur of chores. Lillian's hands, once nimble with needlework, now reddened from hot water and lye soap. By evening, her back ached, but there was satisfaction in earning her keep. She didn't see Zach all day and tried not to feel disappointed by his absence. He owed her nothing, after all. 3 days settled into a routine at the boarding house. Lillian rose early, helped prepare breakfast for the boarders, spent the morning doing laundry or cleaning, assisted with lunch, then tackled whatever tasks Mrs. Harper assigned for the afternoon. In the evenings, she sometimes read from her Bible in the parlor, finding that several of the boarders appreciated hearing the familiar passages. On the fourth day, as Lillian was hanging sheets on the line behind the boarding house, a familiar voice called her name. "Working hard, I see," Zach said, approaching with his hat in his hands. "Mr. Blackwood." Lillian smiled, surprised at how pleased she was to see him. "Yes, Mrs. Harper has been kind enough to give me employment." "Martha Harper's a fine woman, but she'll work you to the bone if you let her," he said with a chuckle. "I'm grateful for the opportunity." Lillian pinned another sheet to the line. "Have you been away?" "Had to check on some strays up north." He hesitated, then said, "I was wondering if you might like to take a walk this evening. The sunset view from the ridge is something special." Lillian felt her cheeks warm. "That would be lovely, but I shouldn't leave Mrs. Harper with all the supper work." "I already asked her. She said she can spare you for an hour or so." This surprised Lillian. "You asked her?" Zach grinned, a transformation that made him appear younger, less weathered. "I've known Martha Harper since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. She looks out for me like a mother hen." "Then I'd be delighted to join you," Lillian said, feeling a flutter of anticipation. That evening, after helping prepare most of the supper in advance, Lillian met Zach outside the boarding house. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance. His clothes were clean, his hair damp from a recent washing. "You look nice," he said, then immediately appeared embarrassed by the compliment. "Thank you," Lillian replied, smoothing the front of her dress. It was the same one she'd been wearing for days, though she'd managed to wash and press it. They walked in companionable silence through the town, nodding to people they passed. Lillian noticed that Zach seemed well respected. Men tipped their hats to him. Women smiled warmly. "You seem to know everyone," she observed. "Been here most of my life," he explained. "My pa brought us west when I was just a boy. Started ranching about 20 miles outside town. I took over after he passed." "You're a rancher then?" "On a small scale. Got about 100 head of cattle, some horses. Nothing like the big spreads further south. But it's enough." As they climbed the gentle slope of the ridge east of town, Lillian found herself telling Zach about her life in Boston, her mother's illness, the long hours working as a seamstress, the correspondence with Walter that had given her hope for a new beginning. "This Walter fella sounds like a real piece of work," Zach said, his jaw tightening. "A man's word should mean something." "It was my own fault," Lillian sighed. "I was too eager to believe in a fairy tale." They reached the top of the ridge just as the sun began its descent. The vista before them was breathtaking rolling hills stretching toward distant mountains, the creek that gave the town its name winding like a silver ribbon through the valley. "It's beautiful," Lillian breathed. "This is my favorite spot," Zach admitted. "Whenever things get too complicated, I come up here to remind myself how big the world is. Makes my problems seem smaller somehow." They sat on a fallen log, watching as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Lillian found herself stealing glances at Zach's profile, admiring the strong line of his jaw, the quiet strength in his features. "What does it say?" Zach asked suddenly, gesturing to the Bible she'd brought along out of habit. "Pardon?" "In your Bible," What passages give you comfort? Lillian opened the worn book, turning to a well-marked page. Psalms mostly. My mother loved the 23rd Psalm. She paused, then asked, "Would you like me to read it?" Zach nodded, his expression unexpectedly vulnerable. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," Lillian began, her voice gaining strength as she continued. "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul." As she read, she was acutely aware of Zach's presence beside her, of his quiet attention to the words. When she finished, they sat in silence for a moment. "That's beautiful," he said finally. "I ain't much for church going, but those words, they make sense out here." "They do, don't they?" Lillian agreed, looking out at the vast landscape. "Green pastures, still waters." "My ma used to read to us from the Bible," Zach confessed. "Been a long time since I heard those words." Impulsively, Lillian held out the Bible. "Would you like to read some?" Zach hesitated, then carefully took the book from her hands. His fingers brushed against hers, sending an unexpected tingle up her arm. "I'm not much of a reader," he admitted. "Just try," she encouraged gently. Zach cleared his throat and began to read haltingly from where her finger had pointed. "God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore will not we fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea." His deep voice gave the words a new resonance. When he stumbled over a word, Lillian softly provided it, and they continued together, his calloused finger tracing the lines while her smaller hand rested lightly beside his on the page. As the light faded, Lillian realized they'd been reading together for nearly an hour. The intimacy of the moment, their heads bent close over the sacred text, their voices mingling in the quiet evening, filled her with a warmth she hadn't expected. "We should head back," Zach said reluctantly, closing the Bible and returning it to her. "Mrs. Harper will be wondering where you are." As they walked back to town, their hands occasionally brushed against each other. Neither acknowledged it, but neither moved away either. At the boarding house door, Zach removed his hat. "Thank you for joining me, Miss Matthews." "Thank you for inviting me, Mr. Blackwood." Lillian clutched her Bible to her chest, suddenly shy. "And thank you for reading with me. Maybe we could do it again sometime," he suggested, looking somewhere past her shoulder. "I'd like that very much." With a tip of his hat, he was gone, striding down the darkened street toward the livery where he'd left his horse. Lillian entered the boarding house, her heart lighter than it had been in months. Mrs. Harper was waiting in the kitchen, a knowing smile on her face. "Have a nice walk?" "Yes, thank you." Lillian busied herself with tidying the already neat counter. "Zachary Blackwood is a good man," Mrs. Harper said casually. "One of the best in these parts." "He seems very kind," Lillian agreed, trying to sound non-committal. "He doesn't bring just anyone up to his special ridge," the older woman continued. "In all the years I've known him, I think you're the first." Lillian didn't know how to respond to that, so she simply nodded and excused herself to her room, where she spent a long time staring out the window at the stars, wondering if Zach was looking at them too as he rode home to his ranch. The next morning, a package arrived for Lillian. Mrs. Harper handed it to her with barely concealed excitement. "This came from Isaac's general store for you, dear." Puzzled, Lillian unwrapped the brown paper to find a simple but pretty blue calico dress, along with a note. "Thought you might like something new to wear. No strings attached. Z." Lillian's hands trembled. The dress was nothing fancy, but it was new and clean and exactly her size. "How did he know?" Mrs. Harper smiled. "He asked me what you might need most. I may have mentioned that a lady appreciates a fresh dress now and then." Touched beyond words, Lillian carefully folded the dress. "I can't accept this. It's too much." That man has barely spent a penny on himself in all the years I've known him, Mrs. Harper said firmly. Let him do something nice for someone else for a change. Later that day, wearing the new blue dress, Lillian was sweeping the front porch when she saw Zach approaching on horseback. He looked tired but brightened visibly when he spotted her. The blue suits you, he said by way of greeting. Mr. Blackwood, I can't possibly accept such a gift, Lillian began. Sure you can, he interrupted. Consider it a welcome to Timber Creek. But, please, he said more softly, it's just a dress. But they both knew it was more than that. It was the first new thing Lillian had owned in years, and it represented a kindness she hadn't expected. Thank you, she said simply. Zach nodded, satisfied. I was wondering if you might join me for Sunday service tomorrow. The circuit preacher's in town. I'd be delighted, Lillian replied, wondering if this constituted a proper courtship. Not that it mattered she was a bride who had been jilted before even reaching the altar, hardly a prize for any man, especially one as well regarded as Zachary Blackwood seemed to be. Sunday dawned clear and mild. Lillian wore her new blue dress and accompanied Mrs. Harper to the small white church at the edge of town. Zach was waiting outside, wearing a clean shirt and his least worn pair of trousers, his usually unruly hair tamed with water. Ladies, he greeted them, offering an arm to each. Mrs. Harper tactfully took a seat with the widow Johnson, leaving Lillian to sit beside Zach in a pew near the back. The service was simple but heartfelt. The traveling preacher, a robust man with a booming voice, delivered a sermon about new beginnings and God's providence that seemed to speak directly to Lillian's situation. When the congregation stood to sing hymns, Zach's deep voice joined hers, slightly off-key but earnest. Their shoulders touched occasionally, sending that now familiar warmth through Lillian's body. After the service, it seemed the entire town wanted to meet Zach Blackwood's lady friend, as several people referred to her. Lillian found herself shaking hands with shopkeepers, ranchers, and their wives, all curious about the Eastern woman who had suddenly appeared in their midst. Don't mind them, Zach murmured as they finally escaped the crowd. News travels fast in a small town, and newcomers are rare. They seem very friendly, Lillian said diplomatically, though the scrutiny had made her uncomfortable. Most are, Zach agreed. Some are just nosy. He walked her back to the boarding house where Mrs. Harper had prepared a special Sunday dinner for her boarders and had invited Zach to join them. Over the next few weeks, a pattern emerged. Zach would come to town every few days, often with some small pretext of business, but always making time to see Lillian. Sometimes they would walk to the ridge and read from her Bible together. Other times, they would simply sit on the boarding house porch, talking about their lives and dreams. Lillian learned that Zach had fought briefly in the war as a very young man, had lost his mother to cholera and his father to a riding accident, and had a younger sister living in Denver with her husband. He spoke little of his achievements, but others in town told Lillian how he had once ridden through a blizzard to bring medicine to a family with sick children, how he hired men others wouldn't give a chance to, how he was always the first to offer help when someone was in need. In turn, Lillian told Zach about her childhood in Boston, her father's early death, her mother's struggle to maintain their middle-class existence through increasingly difficult circumstances. She confessed her own dreams of having a family, a home filled with love and laughter. You'll have that someday, Zach assured her, his eyes warm with something that made her heart race. One evening in late April, as they sat on their log watching the sunset, Zach took her hand in his. Lillian, he said, using her given name for the first time. I'm not good with fancy words, but I think you should know that I've grown mighty fond of you. Lillian's breath caught in her throat. I've grown fond of you too, Zach. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. I've been thinking. Spring roundup is coming, and I'll be away for a couple weeks. When I get back, maybe we could talk about the future. The future? Lillian repeated, hardly daring to hope he meant what she thought he meant. Our future, he clarified, his eyes meeting hers with unmistakable intent. If you'd be interested in such a conversation. Joy bloomed in Lillian's chest. I would be very interested in such a conversation. Zachary Blackwood. His smile was like the sunrise. Slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wished, Zach leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, chaste kiss that nevertheless set her soul alight. When they parted, both were breathless despite the brevity of the contact. I've been wanting to do that for weeks, Zach admitted, his voice husky. I've been hoping you would, Lillian confessed, feeling bold in the fading light. They walked back to town hand in hand, the Bible tucked securely under Lillian's arm, the promise of tomorrow warming them against the evening chill. The next morning, Zach rode out with several other ranchers for the spring roundup. Lillian watched him go from the boarding house porch, already counting the days until his return. He'll be back before you know it, Mrs. Harper said, patting her shoulder. And then, if I'm not mistaken, we might have a wedding to plan. Lillian blushed but didn't contradict her. The thought of becoming Mrs. Zachary Blackwood filled her with a happiness she had never expected to find after the humiliation of being jilted. The days without Zach stretched longer than Lillian had anticipated. She threw herself into her work at the boarding house, taking on extra tasks to keep busy. In the evenings, she would read her Bible, often turning to the passages she and Zach had read together, finding comfort in the memories. On the 10th day after Zach's departure, Mrs. Harper approached Lillian with an unusual request. The schoolteacher, Miss Winters, is down with a fever. The town council is looking for someone to mind the children for a few days. I mentioned you might be willing. Lillian was surprised. Me? But I'm not a trained teacher. You can read and write, can't you? That's more than some folks around here. It would just be for a few days and the pay is good. The thought of earning actual wages was appealing. While Lillian was grateful for room and board at the boarding house, she had no money of her own. I'll do it, she decided. The schoolhouse was a simple one-room building with rows of benches and desks, a teacher's desk at the front, and a blackboard on the wall. 23 children ranging in age from 6 to 14 greeted Lillian with curious stares when she arrived the next morning. Good morning, she said, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. I'm Miss Matthews. I'll be your teacher until Miss Winters recovers. A boy in the back row immediately tested her authority by tossing a paper ball at the girl in front of him. Young man, Lillian said firmly, channeling her mother's no-nonsense tone. In my classroom, we treat each other with respect. What's your name? Tommy Wilson, the boy muttered. Well, Mr. Wilson, since you seem to have excess energy this morning, you can come write the alphabet on the board for us. Surprised by her direct approach, Tommy shuffled to the front and did as he was told, while the other children watched with renewed interest. By lunchtime, Lillian had established a tentative order. She divided the children into groups based on their abilities and set them to work on appropriate lessons. The older ones helped the younger ones, and Lillian moved between groups, offering assistance where needed. When the day ended, Lillian was exhausted but exhilarated. Teaching was challenging but rewarding in a way she hadn't expected. The town council member who came to check on her progress seemed impressed. You've got a natural way with the young ones, Miss Matthews. We'd be pleased if you'd continue until Miss Winters is back on her feet. Lillian agreed happily, finding that she looked forward to returning to the schoolhouse the next day. For the next week, Lillian divided her time between teaching during the day and helping Mrs. Harper in the evenings. The children warmed to her quickly, even Tommy Wilson, who turned out to have a quick mind beneath his mischievous exterior. On Friday afternoon, as Lillian was dismissing the class, she looked up to see Zach standing in the doorway, hat in hand, watching her with undisguised admiration. Mr. Blackwood, she exclaimed, her heart leaping at the sight of him. He looked tanned and tired, with several days' growth of beard, but his eyes were bright as they met hers. The children, noticing her distraction, turned to see the newcomer. "It's Mr. Blackwood," several voices called out. To Lillian's surprise, the children rushed to greet him with enthusiasm. Zach knelt down to their level, answering questions about the roundup and listening to their excited chatter about their temporary teacher. "Miss Matthews reads to us with different voices for all the characters," one little girl informed him. "Is that so?" Zach's eyes found Lillian's over the children's heads, warm with amusement. "And she taught us a song about the states," added another child. "She sounds pretty special," Zach agreed, still looking at Lillian. When the children finally dispersed, running home with news of the rancher's return, Zach and Lillian were left alone in the schoolhouse. "I didn't expect to find you here," Zach said, stepping closer. "Miss Winters fell ill. I've been filling in." Lillian suddenly felt shy, aware of how she must look after a day with the children, hair escaping its pins, a smudge of chalk on her sleeve. "The children adore you," Zach observed. "They're not easy to impress." "They're wonderful children. I've enjoyed teaching them." Zach took another step toward her. "I missed you, Lillian." The simple declaration made her heart soar. "I missed you too." He reached out to tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I thought about you every night, looking up at the stars, wondering if you were looking at them too." "I was," she whispered. This time when he kissed her, it was less hesitant, more certain. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, while her hands rested against his chest, feeling the strong beat of his heart beneath her palms. When they finally parted, both were breathing heavily. "I should get you back to town before people start talking," Zach said reluctantly. "Let them talk," Lillian replied with newfound boldness, then immediately blushed at her own forwardness. Zach laughed, a rich, joyous sound that filled the schoolhouse. "Miss Matthews, I do believe Montana is bringing out a daring side in you." "Perhaps it's the company I'm keeping," she countered with a smile. They walked back to town together, Zach leading his horse, their shoulders occasionally brushing. Lillian felt as though she was floating, buoyed by happiness and the promise in Zach's eyes. At the boarding house, Mrs. Harper greeted Zach with a motherly hug. "About time you got back. The poor girl's been pining for you something fierce." "Mrs. Harper?" Lillian protested, mortified. Zach just grinned. "Is that so?" "Don't tease the girl," Mrs. Harper scolded him. "Now come inside and have some supper. You look like you haven't had a decent meal in weeks." Over supper, Zach regaled them with tales from the roundup the new calves, a flash flood that had nearly carried away their camp, the camaraderie around the campfire at night. "Will you be staying in town tonight?" Mrs. Harper asked as she served apple pie for dessert. "Thought I might," Zach replied. "It's been a long ride, and Storm could use the rest." He glanced at Lillian. "Besides, I was hoping Miss Matthews might join me for a walk after supper." "Of course she will," Mrs. Harper answered before Lillian could respond. "The dishes can wait." After helping clear the table despite Mrs. Harper's protests, Lillian joined Zach outside. The evening was warm for spring, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of new growth and promise. They walked in comfortable silence to their ridge, where they sat on their log and watched the stars emerge one by one. "I meant what I said before I left," Zach said quietly, "about talking about our future." Lillian's heart quickened. "I've thought of little else while you were gone." Zach took her hand, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Lillian, I know we haven't known each other long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you." The words, simple and direct, filled Lillian with joy. "I love you too, Zach." He smiled, relief evident in his features. "When I first saw you at that way station, clutching your Bible like it was your lifeline. Something told me you were special. I never expected to fall in love with you, but I thank God every day that I did. Even though I arrived with nothing? Lillian asked softly. You arrived with everything that matters, Zach corrected her, touching the Bible that lay between them. Your faith, your courage, your kind heart. Those are worth more than any material possessions. He shifted, suddenly nervous. What I'm trying to say, not very well, is, Lillian Matthews, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Tears of happiness filled Lillian's eyes. Yes, Zachary Blackwood. Yes, I will marry you. Zach's whoop of joy echoed across the valley. He stood, pulling Lillian to her feet and spinning her around in an exuberant embrace. When he set her down, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. It's not fancy, he said apologetically, holding out a simple gold band. It was my mother's. My pa gave it to her when they decided to head west together. It's perfect, Lillian breathed, as Zach slipped it onto her finger. It fit as though it had been made for her. They sealed their engagement with a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and partnership. The following Sunday, after church service, Zach and Lillian announced their engagement to the community. The news was met with enthusiastic approval, especially from Mrs. Harper, who claimed she'd known from the first day that they were meant for each other. When's the wedding? Someone called out. Zach looked to Lillian. We were thinking next month, after the planting is done. My ranch house needs a woman's touch, he explained later as they walked through town, accepting congratulations from passers-by. It's a solid place, but plain. I want you to feel it's your home too. I'm sure it's lovely, Lillian assured him. Would you like to see it? We could ride out there tomorrow. The idea of seeing her future home filled Lillian with excitement. I'd love that. The next day, Zach arrived at the boarding house early, riding Storm and leading a gentle mare for Lillian. This is Daisy, he said as he helped Lillian mount. She's steady and sweet, just like her new owner. The ride to Zach's ranch took about an hour at a leisurely pace. As they crested a hill, Zach pulled up and pointed ahead. There it is, Blackwood Ranch. Below them lay a picturesque valley with a creek running through it. A sturdy two-story house stood in a grove of cottonwoods, with a large barn, corrals, and several outbuildings nearby. Cattle grazed on the lush spring grass of the surrounding pastures. Oh, Zach, Lillian breathed. It's beautiful. Pride was evident in his voice as he described the ranch, the spring that never ran dry, the sheltered pastures where the cattle could weather the winter's storms, the orchard his mother had planted that still produced apples every fall. As they rode into the yard, a lanky young man emerged from the barn. Miss Matthews, this is Jake Peterson, my foreman. Zach introduced them. Jake, this is my fiancée, Miss Lillian Matthews. Jake tipped his hat respectfully. Pleasure to meet you, madam. Boss hasn't stopped talking about you for weeks. Lillian smiled, charmed by the young man's frankness. The pleasure is mine, Mr. Peterson. Jake's been with me for 5 years, Zach explained as he helped Lillian dismount. He runs things when I'm away. And does a fine job of it, too, Jake added with a grin, taking the horse's reins. You two go on. I'll see to Daisy and Storm. Zach led Lillian to the house, suddenly appearing nervous. It's not fancy like the houses back east. Zach, Lillian interrupted gently. I lived above a milliner's shop in Boston with my mother. Our rooms were tiny and always smelled of hat stiffener. This is a palace by comparison. Relieved, he opened the door and ushered her inside. The house was indeed plain, but solid and well built. The main floor consisted of a large kitchen with a massive wood stove, a dining area, and a comfortable sitting room with a stone fireplace. Bookshelves lined one wall, surprisingly well stocked for a man who claimed not to be much of a reader. My pa believed in education, Zach explained, following her gaze. Said just because we lived in the wilds didn't mean we had to be ignorant. Upstairs were 3 bedrooms and a small study. The master bedroom had large windows that offered a view of the mountains in the distance. "This would be our room," Zach said, a hint of shyness in his voice. Lillian's cheeks warmed at the thought, but she smiled and nodded. "It's perfect, Zach. Truly." Back downstairs, they sat at the kitchen table while Zach prepared coffee. "What do you think? Could you be happy here?" he asked, a vulnerability in his eyes that tugged at Lillian's heart. "I already am happy," she assured him, reaching across the table to take his hand. "This is more than I ever dreamed of having." Relief washed over his features. "I want to give you everything, Lillian. A good life, a home filled with love, children if we're blessed with them." "That's all I want too," she said softly. "A life built on love and faith." They spent the day exploring the ranch. Zach showed her the creek where he'd fished as a boy, the old oak tree he'd fallen from and broken his arm at age 10, the meadow that exploded with wildflowers every summer. As the sun began to set, they reluctantly prepared to return to town. Zach had work to do on the ranch, and Lillian had promised to continue teaching until Miss Winters recovered. "It won't be long," Zach said as he helped her mount Daisy, "and you'll be coming home to stay." "I can hardly wait," Lillian replied, meaning every word. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of preparation. The women of Timber Creek rallied around Lillian, helping her prepare for her new role as a rancher's wife. Mrs. Harper organized a pounding where each family brought a pound of something useful for the newlyweds' home: flour, sugar, coffee, fabric, seeds for a garden. Zach came to town as often as his work allowed, sometimes just for a few hours to see Lillian and discuss wedding plans. On one such visit, he brought an unexpected gift. "I found these in a trunk in the attic," he said, presenting Lillian with a bundle wrapped in muslin. "They were my mother's. I thought you might be able to use them." Inside were Linen's finely embroidered pillowcases, a tablecloth, and napkins. "They're beautiful," Lillian gasped, running her fingers over the delicate stitching. "She made them for her hope chest before she married Pa," Zach explained. "She'd want you to have them." Tears pricked Lillian's eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gift. "I'll treasure them, Zach." As the wedding day approached, Lillian's excitement was tempered by a touch of melancholy. She wished her mother could have met Zach, could have seen the happiness Lillian had found after so much sorrow. The night before the wedding, as Lillian prepared for bed in her room at the boarding house, Mrs. Harper knocked on her door. "May I come in, dear?" "Of course," Lillian welcomed her. Mrs. Harper sat on the edge of the bed, patting the space beside her. When Lillian joined her, the older woman took her hands. "I know I'm not your mother, Lillian, but I've come to care for you as if you were my own daughter. I wanted to tell you how proud I am of you, and how happy I am that you and Zach found each other." Tears filled Lillian's eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Harper. You've been so kind to me." "Call me Martha, dear. We're past formalities now." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small box. "I wanted you to have this for tomorrow." Inside was a delicate silver hairpin with a small pearl. "It was my grandmother's," Martha explained. "She wore it on her wedding day, and so did I. I never had a daughter to pass it to, but I'd be honored if you'd wear it tomorrow." Touched beyond words, Lillian hugged the older woman tightly. "I would be honored, Martha. Thank you." The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, as if nature itself was blessing the union. The small church was decorated with wildflowers gathered by the schoolchildren, who had insisted on contributing to their teacher's special day. Lillian dressed in a simple but elegant white dress that the town seamstress had helped her make. Martha arranged her hair, securing it with the precious hairpin, and placed a crown of daisies on her head. "You look beautiful," Martha said, wiping away a tear. "Absolutely beautiful." With no father to give her away, Lillian had asked the town's mayor, a kind elderly man who had shown her much kindness, to escort her down the aisle. As the church door opened and Lillian saw Zach waiting for her at the altar, handsome in his new suit, love shining in his eyes, she knew with absolute certainty that this was where she was meant to be. The ceremony was simple, but deeply meaningful. When the time came to exchange vows, Zach's strong voice filled the church. I, Zachary James Blackwood, take thee, Lillian Elizabeth Matthews, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part, according to God's holy ordinance, and thereto I pledge thee my faith. Lillian's voice was clear and steady as she repeated the vows, her eyes never leaving Zach's. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Zach kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. The celebration afterward was held in the town square, with tables laden with food contributed by every family in Timber Creek. There was music and dancing, laughter and joy as the community celebrated the union of two people who had come to mean so much to them all. As evening approached, Zach and Lillian prepared to leave for the ranch, their home. Farewells were said, good wishes exchanged, and promises made to visit soon. Ready, Mrs. Blackwood? Zach asked, helping Lillian into the wagon that would take them home. Ready, Mr. Blackwood, she replied, her heart full to bursting with happiness. As they drove away, the townspeople cheering behind them, Lillian leaned against her husband's shoulder, her Bible secure in her lap, the future stretching before them like the vast Montana sky full of promise, adventure, and love. The first weeks of marriage were a time of adjustment and discovery. Lillian learned the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings, the satisfaction of work done with one's hands, the peace of evenings spent on the porch watching the sunset. Zach proved to be a patient teacher as Lillian learned to cook on the massive wood stove, to tend the kitchen garden, to ride longer distances without getting saddle sore. In turn, she brought order and warmth to the house, filling it with flowers, arranging the books by subject, making curtains for the windows from fabric given as wedding gifts. Their evenings often ended as they had begun, with Lillian's Bible open between them, taking turns reading passages to each other, finding new meaning in the ancient words as they applied them to their life together. I never understood this part before, Zach said one evening as they read from the book of Ruth. Whither thou goest I will go, and where thou lodgest I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. What do you understand now? Lillian asked, curled against him on the sofa before the fire. That it's not just about following someone to a new place, it's about embracing their whole life, making it your own. He kissed the top of her head. Like you've done here. Lillian smiled, thinking of how completely she had fallen in love with this place, this life, this man. It wasn't hard. You made it easy to belong here. In July, Lillian discovered she was expecting a child. She waited until evening, when she and Zach were sitting on the porch swing watching the fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. Zach, she said softly, I have something to tell you. He turned to her, his expression curious. What is it, love? We're going to have a baby in early spring. Zach's face transformed with wonder and joy. A baby? Are you sure? Lillian nodded, her own happiness reflected in his eyes. I'm sure. With a whoop that startled the horses in the nearby corral, Zach lifted Lillian from the swing and spun her around, then immediately set her down, looking alarmed. Should I be doing that? I didn't hurt you, did I? Or the baby? Lillian laughed, touching his cheek tenderly. We're fine, Zach. The baby is tiny yet, like a seed just planted. He placed his hand reverently on her still flat stomach. Our child, he whispered. our family. The months that followed were filled with preparation and anticipation. Zach insisted that Lillian rest more, taking on additional chores himself and hiring a local girl to help with the housework. Lillian protested that she wasn't an invalid, but secretly appreciated his concern. They converted the bedroom closest to theirs into a nursery, painting the walls a cheerful yellow. Zach surprised Lillian by building a cradle, working on it in the evenings by the fire while she sewed tiny garments. "My pa made one for me," he explained as he sanded the wood to a silky smoothness. "It's a family tradition." As Lillian's pregnancy progressed, their reading sessions often turned to passages about children, about God's blessings, about the future. "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it," Zach read one evening, his hand resting on Lillian's rounded belly. "That's what we'll do, won't we? Raise our child to be good and kind, to love God and others." "Yes," Lillian agreed, covering his hand with her own. "And to be brave and honest, like his father. Or gentle and wise, like his mother," Zach countered with a smile. Winter settled over the ranch, blanketing the land in white. Zach kept the house warm with fires blazing in every hearth, worried about Lillian catching a chill. Their Christmas was quiet but joyful, with visits from neighbors and friends who braved the snow to celebrate with them. As February turned to March, Lillian felt the first pangs of labor. Zach, who had barely left her side in the preceding weeks, immediately sent Jake for the midwife in town. "Everything will be fine," Lillian assured him, though her own heart raced with a mixture of excitement and fear. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." "Not my woman," Zach replied, his face etched with concern. "Not with my child." The labor was long and difficult. Through the night and into the next day, Lillian fought to bring their child into the world. Zach refused to leave her, holding her hand, wiping her brow, praying fervently when the pain seemed too much for her to bear. As the sun began to set on the second day, with Lillian exhausted and Zach nearly frantic with worry, their daughter finally arrived with a lusty cry that filled the room. "A girl," the midwife announced, cleaning and wrapping the tiny red-faced infant. "A beautiful, healthy girl." When the midwife placed the swaddled bundle in Lillian's arms, the exhaustion of labor was forgotten in the flood of love that overwhelmed her. "Hello, little one," she whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes, marveling at the perfection of their child. Zach sat beside them on the bed, his arm around Lillian, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he gazed at his daughter. "She's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Next to her mother." They named her Hope, Elizabeth Blackwood Hope, for the future they had found together. Elizabeth for Lillian's mother. In the days that followed, as Lillian recovered her strength and they adjusted to life with a newborn, they often found themselves simply watching their daughter sleep, amazed that their love had created something so miraculous. One evening, as Hope lay sleeping in her cradle beside their bed, Zach brought Lillian's Bible and sat beside her. "I found something today," he said, opening to a page marked with a ribbon. "Listen. For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end." Lillian smiled, recognizing the verse from Jeremiah. "It's beautiful." "It made me think of us," Zach continued, "how everything that seemed like misfortune, your intended rejecting you, being left at that way station with nothing but your Bible, was actually leading you here, to this life, to me, and now to hope." "God's plan," Lillian agreed, resting her head on his shoulder. "Even when we couldn't see it." "I'm grateful every day that you had that Bible with you," Zach said softly. "That you held on to your faith through everything. That you were willing to share it with a rough cowboy who hadn't opened a Bible in years." And I'm grateful that you took my hand and read with me, Lillian replied, remembering those first tentative readings on the ridge overlooking Timber Creek. That you opened your heart to me and to God's word. Zach kissed her gently. Our daughter will grow up knowing these stories, these truths. She'll have what we built together, a home founded on love and faith. As if aware she was being discussed, hope stirred in her cradle, making the small mewling sounds that preceded waking. Zach lifted her carefully, cradling her against his broad chest with a tenderness that never failed to move Lillian. "Hello, little darling," he murmured, swaying slightly as Hope blinked up at him with newborn blue eyes. "Your mama and I were just talking about you." Lillian watched them, her heart so full it seemed it might burst. From the depths of loss and abandonment, she had found everything she'd ever wanted: a loving husband, a beautiful child, a home filled with warmth and faith. As Hope began to fuss in earnest, Lillian held out her arms. "I think she's hungry." Zach handed the baby to her, then sat beside them on the bed. One arm around Lillian's shoulders, the other hand gently stroking Hope's downy head as she nursed. "I love you both so much," he said simply, the words carrying the weight of absolute truth. "And we love you," Lillian replied, leaning into his strength, grateful beyond words for the life they were building together. Outside, the first signs of spring were appearing: green shoots pushing through the melting snow, birds returning from their winter migration, days growing longer and warmer. Like the land awakening around them, their life together was just beginning, full of promise and possibility. As Hope finished nursing and drifted back to sleep against her mother's breast, Lillian thought of the journey that had brought her here, from Boston to Montana, from heartbreak to joy, from solitude to family. The Bible that had been her only possession that fateful day at the way station now lay open beside them, a testament to the faith that had sustained her and ultimately led her home. In the quiet of their bedroom, with her daughter in her arms and her husband beside her, Lillian knew with absolute certainty that this was exactly where she was meant to be. Whatever the future held, they would face it together, reading from the same page, their love growing stronger with each passing day. As the years passed, the Blackwood family flourished. Hope grew into a spirited, intelligent girl with her father's dark hair and her mother's gentle eyes. When she was 3, she was joined by a brother, James Zachary, who had his father's quiet strength and steadfast nature. Zach expanded the ranch, adding more cattle and horses, building a reputation for fair dealing and quality stock. Lillian, meanwhile, became known throughout the region for her kind heart and unwavering faith. People often came to the Blackwood Ranch seeking advice or comfort, and no one ever left without feeling uplifted by Lillian's gentle wisdom. Every evening, no matter how busy the day had been, the family gathered in the sitting room. Zach and Lillian took turns reading from the well-worn Bible, their children listening attentively, asking questions, learning the stories and teachings that had brought their parents together and continued to guide their lives. Sometimes, on clear summer evenings, Zach and Lillian would walk up to the ridge where they had first read together, hand in hand, their Bible tucked under Lillian's arm, their children running ahead, their hearts full of gratitude for the life they had built together, a life that had begun when a bride was left with nothing but a Bible, and a cowboy took her hand and read with her.